We are discussing the chapter 3, the research methodology, and this is what actually makes your research scientific. In a research project or in any research, people may have good opinion, good topics, good title, good development of their chapter 1, chapter 2, and all of that. But what makes your research project scientific? It is the chapter 3. In some clients, they may call it chapter 4, chapter 5, depending on the setup. But I'm following that of behavioral science, management science, and social science and education. So we have the chapter 3, or whichever chapter that is named, we are discussing the methodology. So, and you'll be guided the way to present your chapter 3, what the content of the chapter 3, basic content of the chapter 3, how to develop each content, how to write very well to present the chapter 3. That will lead us to the last phase of it, which is the data analysis. And so you'll be guided to know what tool do I use to analyze my data, or first, what kind of data am I looking at to collect in my research study. And so all of this we would be doing together. Okay, so now I'm using this project to guide us. I would be referring back to chapter 1, chapter 2, because the research reports are all linked together. They are all linked together. What we are saying is that in your chapter 1, you have told us that you have identified a problem and you want to address that problem through research. And you have broken down that problem into achievable objectives and design. You have drawn up your research question as well as framed some hypotheses. Then the chapter 2, which is your literature review, which you've done, you have discussed the current state of knowledge in that particular area, that there is this problem, and this is the current state of knowledge regarding that problem, and you want to add to that state of knowledge, the body of knowledge. And so what in the chapter 2, you have been able to now show what other people have done to address that problem, but the problem is still there and yet to be fully addressed, and your study also is coming in to contribute in addressing that problem. Your chapter 2 also tells us the foundation upon which you believe that your research is valid, and that's what we call the theoretical framework. We have discussed this in our last lecture, the chapter 1 and the chapter 2. If you don't have it, you can indicate, and we'll send you the link to download it and listen to it. And so, having stated your problem and broken it down to achievable objective, now you want to go about to collect data to analyze and come up with predictions and findings that would help solve this problem. And that is the chapter 3, the methodology. The methodology. You have said there is a problem and you want to solve it. And you have shown the extent to which this problem has been solved but yet unresolved. Now you want to solve this problem. You want to tell your readers what method you are using to address this problem. You want to show, the chapter 3 shows the methodology or research methods. Please get it clear. Look at the format, the chapter 3 methodology. It is not research methodology. Research methodology is a course, a program you do in school. They say research methodology is a course program. But when you say methodology, you are talking about the method you have adopted to use to address your research problem. Or you can either title it methodology or research methods. Research methods. So you have to be very, very careful and follow the correct and proper format when writing your research project. Okay, so now we move to the practicality of this chapter. So the first thing in this chapter is the preamble. And this is as simple as it is. Usually it is called the introduction, but because in your research project you already have a chapter titled introduction, then it is not proper and right to have in other chapters introduction. So you use a synonym or invariably remove it entirely. But what we are saying about the preamble, you have to introduce the chapter. So each chapter is introduced. Beside the chapter 1, subsequent chapter, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, they are introduced. And what does the preamble do or show to us? The preamble simply tells us what the readers are going to see or meet in that chapter. And if you look at the screen of what has been displayed there, you could see that when you are reading your chapter 3 methodology, we have the preamble. And this is the section where the chapter is introduced to the reader. That's the preamble. You want to introduce the chapter to the reader. And it contains a briefing on the content and structure of the chapter. Also, it informs and prepares the minds of the reader on the coherence, that's the logic, and cohesion, that's the flow of the methodological structure of the chapter. This is as simple as this. So what you are doing here is just to introduce this chapter, and that is the very beginning of your chapter 3. And you could see an example of the preamble there. You could see there are 2 examples there. For example, this is how you write your preamble. This chapter describes the methodology or research method adopted for the study, which includes the research design, population sample size and sampling technique, the data collection instrument, and the issue of validity and reliability. The chapter also provides discussions on the design and administration of the research instrument, operationalization and measurement of the variables of the study, and the model specification and method of data analysis. This is what the preamble is all about. So you can discuss it whichever way you want, whichever way you like, use whichever command of English that that you prefer. But what matters is that keep it simple, don't keep it long. Simple, and let it contain the vital item that your readers are going to meet in your chapter 3. So this is what the preamble is all about. There's another example there, if you can see it. It says, in this chapter, the researcher discusses the methodology or research method adopted for the study, providing a clear justification of the research approach adopted. It begins with a discussion on the research philosophy and approach adopted for the study. It then examines the research design strategy, including data collection method, questionnaire design, pilot study, population, sample size, and sampling technique. The chapter presents the model specification and explains the measurement of the dependent and independent variable. It describes the data analysis method and the limitation of the research method. It finally discusses the ethical considerations and summarizes the chapter. So whichever way you are writing your preamble, please let it be brief but detailed, containing all the necessary items in that chapter that your readers are going to meet there. Okay, so that is the preamble. And there is a note there. You could see the note there. Please, you are not to assign a number to the preamble, or you may choose not to give the section a heading by leaving out the title preamble, but you must provide a brief introducing the chapter to the readers. And so the next thing you meet in your methodology is the research philosophy. I will briefly explain this, but for your undergraduate project, you don't need this. Although it's supposed to be there, but they have not been requiring it from students. But at the master's level, you have to put your research philosophy, and at the PhD level, you have to put your research philosophy. So if you look at the theoretical explanation there, in a standard research project, or better to say in some educational climes, like in some developed countries, and at times for PhD or master research projects, researchers specify their chosen research philosophy supporting their investigation. I would explain the research philosophy. And why do they need to do this? It is important that researchers specify the research philosophy upon which the choice of their methodologies or research methods hinge. So what is a research philosophy and how does it apply in a research project? Actually, what research philosophy is about, because every researcher is guided by a philosophy. And remember that ab initio, for you coming up with a research topic, a research problem, you already have an expectation in your mind. That's what research philosophy is about. Every researcher has an expectation. If you are writing on a particular topic, you have an expectation that that this thing affects this. For example, eating habits affects weight accumulation. And the researcher, before even going to the field, already have a kind of philosophy that eating habits should affect weight accumulation. And they believe of that knowledge. They believe of either the reality of that knowledge or believing that should be true. It's what we mean by the research philosophy. And you could see there, defined by Ryan, you could see there what Ryan said about research philosophy. I've highlighted it there. Research philosophy, according to Ryan, 2018, is what a researcher perceives to be the truth, reality, and knowledge. So like I said, you undertaking a research project, you already have a bias. You have an expectation. There's something you want to test to say, yes, this thing, there should be a relationship here, and that's why you want to test it. And truly, if you don't have a bias, then there's no basis for you conducting a research. So you are already having, that's why you also have hypothesis, that you are hypothesizing. You are actually, research is all about knowledge play, about reality, what is going on, how to improve knowledge, how to counter knowledge. Some people says it's like this, and we are coming up with something else and all of that. So the research philosophy guides the researcher in choosing his or her methodology, the methodology to use. And usually and generally, there are two main research philosophies in literature, although there are four, but you don't need all of this. If you look at here, there are four. Look, I've highlighted it. You see it in blue, yellow. There are four main trends of research philosophy that influence researchers across discipline, which are: number one, interpretivism; number two, positivism; number three, pragmatism; and number four, realism. But the two main which guides undergraduate and master's project generally, because we can't be discussing all of this research philosophy, this is a practical training, so you just have to go straight to the point. But we have the two main philosophies that are guiding research generally are the interpretivism and positivism. Interpretivism and positivism. So you could see now I've highlighted what these two. So, but let me quickly explain what they mean. Interpretivism does not believe in objective search for knowledge. That's interpretivism. It's humans that form knowledge by their social interaction. But positivism believes that knowledge is already there and we have to discover it out. So if you could see, interpretivism considers reality to be socially constructed by individuals, while positivism considers reality to be ordered, objective, and governed by natural laws. So when you are conducting your research, the philosophy guiding you will determine the kind of methodology to adopt. Are you a positivist researcher or you are an interpretivist researcher? Generally, in America, North America and America, the mainstream research, they are positivists, where you have to collect data, you have to analyze data before you arrive at a knowledge. But interpretivism, which is more of the UK and a minority of them, but now it is gaining more ground actually. It's where they believe that you cannot objectively measure variables. So rather, you discuss along the line of social interaction to understand reality. So what we are saying is that it's not all research that you collect data and analyze and you apply statistical tool. It's not all research. And this has been categorized into two broad research philosophy, the interpretivist and the positivist approach. So this is positivism. Positivism, on the other hand, considers reality to be ordered, objective, and governed by natural laws that can be understood through experience. Positivists believe that the way to get at the truth must be through scientific research, and that knowledge exists in the form of natural laws that can be learned, explained, and acquired. With positivism, researchers derive testable hypotheses from a theory. Testable hypothesis from a theory about the relationship between two or more variables. Then the hypotheses are tested by gathering data relating to the variables and performing statistical tests to identify significant association. Now, what's the practical guide here? If you are to include research philosophy in your project, this is the practical guide. In this section, you are only expected to state. So you say in this study, the research philosophy, you see the example there. So let me go through the practical guide, then we'll take the example. In this section, you are only expected to state, explain, and justify the research philosophy you are adopting in your study to guide your choice of methodologies or research methods to achieve the objective of the study. And so therefore, our discussion in this training will be limited to positivism. Okay, now look at an example of a research philosophy. So in your project, if you are to state your research philosophy, this is how you go about it. The choice of methodology or research method adopted in this research project revolves around the positivist research paradigm or philosophy. And then that is state it. The first thing is to state your research philosophy. The second thing is to explain it. The positivist philosophy seeks to identify a testable hypothesis about the association between two or more variables from a theory, which is then tested empirically by collecting data related to the variables and then performing statistical tests on the data to identify significant associations. Accordingly, it is believed in this research, that is in your research now, that the association between the dependent and independent variables can be objectively observed, understood, and explained through the development of hypotheses and analysis of data with statistical tool. So this is what you are expected to do. This is what you are expected to do. Another example there is this. I've highlighted it. When you come to research philosophy, you are not talking story. This is just a simple thing you are expected to write. Under research philosophy, you say, this research project, that's your project, is designed along the interpretivist research philosophy. And the reason for the choice of this philosophy is based on the researcher's beliefs or belief system of knowledge. The objective of this study, which is to establish a social interaction between the dependent and independent variables, follow the ideology of the interpretivist philosophy, which assumes reality to be socially constructed through individual interaction and interpretation. So this is what is expected of you when you are writing your research philosophy. And this, as simple as this, your methodology is the most simple aspect in your research project. It has three main philosophies guiding that's your chapter 3. State what you have done, explain what you have done, and justify what you have done. That's all. These three things must never leave you in any of the section in your chapter 3. State what you have done, explain what you have done, and justify what you have done. So straight away under research philosophy, this study, that's your research, is guided by positivist research philosophy. Explain what it means. The positivist research philosophy seeks to identify testable hypotheses, which your study also seeks to do, and to gather data to analyze and come up with a conclusion, which your study is set to do, and justify why you have chosen the philosophy. So this is the second aspect. And like I said, for those that are doing undergraduate projects, we usually don't require this from our students because we assume they are all positivists in their philosophy. But if you want to show that, yes, you are a master of your research project, then you put research philosophy and the panel will understand that this person knows what he or she is doing. But at a master's level and PhD level, it is compulsory to some extent that you put your research philosophy because you are building on a knowledge. Okay, so there's a note there. The note is that please remember to cite relevant sources to justify your choice of aligning towards your adopted research philosophy. Simply put, choose a research philosophy, explain it, and justify your choice of philosophy with relevant cited sources. So this is the first and the second aspect after the preamble. Now we are moving to the research design. People have asked a lot of questions on research design. Some don't even understand what research design is. They just go and copy another project and say, yes, I'm using this research design and all of that. It is better you understand what you are doing. You'll be able to discuss it. You enjoy what you are doing, and you'll be able to defend it appropriately with sound knowledge. So we have the research design. And usually your choice of research design is guided by your philosophy. And like I said, I'm assuming that you are all positivists in your research philosophy. And the appropriate research design should align with what positivists believe about research and knowledge. Okay, so now we have the theoretical explanation before we go to the practical guide. Now the theoretical explanation, so that you understand research design. Upon the choice of research philosophy, the researcher further decides on the research design that best fits, that best fits the objective of the study along the path of the chosen belief or system of knowledge. Now, what is a research design? Look at this, highlighted in yellow. A research design is a framework that has been created to find answers to research questions. That is the simple understanding ideology of a research design. You have a problem you have identified in your chapter 1. You have broken it down into achievable objective and research question and hypothesis. Now you have a design to guide you from the beginning of collecting data, analyzing the data to provide answer to your research questions, which will help you address the problem that you have identified. That is what research design. So what do I follow in achieving addressing my problem? It's just like somebody wants to build a house and they have a plan. There's a plan for that house. That plan is called a design. That's the design of the building. So the architect will come and build that house according to the design. What we are saying is that the research design is what guides the researcher how to go about collecting his data, analyzing the data, and reporting the findings. It guides, in fact, the research design is what guides every other thing we will see in your methodology, why you are using what you are using, why you are choosing questionnaire, why you are using secondary data, all of that. This It's the research design that tells you all of this. So a research design refers to the overall. On the second sentence, you could see it here now. It is in blue. It refers to the overall strategy utilized to carry out research that defines a succinct and logical plan to tackle established research questions through the collection, interpretation, and analysis and discussion of data. Please take note of that. The research design. So what we are simply saying about research design is what guides the researcher from in answering his research question by collecting data, the type of data to collect, analyzing the data, the types of statistical tool to use, and interpreting and presenting the report, the finding. So practical guide, how do I write my research design? How do I go about my research design? You put your research design. I said, please let these three things guide you. In your methodology, you are not to write a textbook. All you are doing is state what you have done, explain what you have done, and justify why you have done what you have done. So the practical guide there is, under research design, in this section, you are expected to state, explain, and justify the research design you have adopted. Now, you could see that most undergraduate and master's research projects, you could see it there. I've highlighted it blue. Most undergraduate and master's research projects are designed along survey. That is, when you are collecting primary data, you are using questionnaire. Most of you would design questionnaire. In Nigeria, most research projects that we have seen over and over and over is either the use of questionnaire and or the use of secondary data, that's annual reports. You are downloading annual reports. You are collecting data from CBN. You are collecting data from NBS. You are collecting data from World Bank. But majority make use of survey. So it is simple. Just state your research design. If you are using survey, that's you plan to collect questionnaire, you just say the research design I adopted for this study is survey. Explain what you mean by survey. And or if you are collecting secondary data, whichever way you are collecting it, then you will state that the research design for this study is ex post facto design. And you explain what that simply means. But like I said, you can blend other designs together, and you could see there that we have descriptive, that's descriptive. We have explanatory, cross-sectional. We have case study. We have content analysis. We have exploratory. We have experimental, among others. So these are different types of design. What you are saying about your design is that this is the direction that this study is following to be able to collect data, analyze the data, and come up with its finding to test its hypothesis. And all these research design are simple. You can just easily understand them. When you are using survey descriptive, you want to describe the relationship existing between your two variables or your dependent and independent variable. You want to just describe how that eating of rice makes somebody fat. Fatness is the dependent, eating of rice is the independent. Descriptive survey, you want to collect data among a group of people using a questionnaire and provide a description of between that to describe the relationship between the two variables, eating of rice and weight addition. You are describing how. Now, when you talk about explanatory, you are trying to explain the nature of relationship that exists between eating of rice and adding weight. So when you talk about cross-sectional survey, is that a large group of people, you are cross-sectional, each individual, you are giving them opportunity to participate, a cross-sectional, you are not doing time series. There's time series design. and that is more for secondary, those using secondary data. Time series simply means that you are collecting data for several years, time series, for 10 years period, for 5 years period, and all of that. Secondary data that is available, like annual report, you may collect data from 2010 to 2021. So that is time series. They are different points in time you are collecting data. But for primary data, usually it is a sports event. So you are collecting from a cross-sectional group of people, maybe all final year students. All final year students are your population. So you are collecting data from a large pool of individuals in a cross-sectional way. Then you have case study. Some of you will put case study of manufacturing company, case study of consumer good company, case study. All of that is good. It's also a design. But even when you are saying case study, actually once you are collecting secondary data from annual report and all of that, you are using ex post facto design. So you only integrate case study into it. Case study into it, because a real case study is to pick one organization and do an in-depth study on that organization alone. So, but usually for you at your level, what you are doing is either survey or ex post facto design, and then integrate what you want to achieve with a design by any of these other design. Content analysis is that you are taking the content of an annual report or report somewhere, and you are analyzing it in words, paragraph, all this thing, and converting it to parameters, measurable parameters. What we are saying here is that this is the research design I'm using, survey. All those that are using questionnaire, I'm using survey, and this is the reason why this is what survey is about. This is the reason why I'm using survey. For those using secondary data, I am using my research design is ex post facto, is explanatory, is exploratory, it is all of that. And this is the reason why I'm using this research design. That is the practical guide to the research. Now look at an example there stated. I've highlighted this. So you could see the example there is highlighted in green. So I read that underpinned by the research philosophy guiding this research, a cross-sectional survey. So you could see now that it is a survey design, but cross-sectional has been blended into it. You could put a descriptive survey. You could put an exploratory survey was adopted, whichever design one you want to blend into your study. So underpinned by the research philosophy guiding this research, a cross-sectional survey design was adopted for the study. That is the first thing to do. I said state your design. The next thing, explain the design. The third thing, justify the design. Okay, the preference of the survey design, you could see now, compared to, you see, the preference of the survey design compared to other design is based on the following rationale, that is the following reasons. So, first, as a multivariate analysis study, quite a large number of respondents are required. So all your studies you'll be doing, you require large number of respondents when you are doing survey. And first, as a motivator, required to aid generalization, which can only be reached effectively by a survey. So you have to justify and provide citation why survey is the best for your study. You are at liberty to choose whichever design you want to choose, but explain it and justify it. And this is the justification. Secondly, the survey design limits the researcher's interference with the study outcome. Third, it saves time and cost compared to experimental design. And finally, other people have used the survey design. As simple as that. If you are using secondary data, you give your reasons why you are using secondary data. Because your study is designed to analyze how a company financial performance is affected by its investment in corporate social responsibility. And this can only be found in their annual reports. That's a justification why you are using ex post facto research design. Because your study will depend on secondary data, not primary data. So you have to provide a justification for that. So just to guide you generally, majority of you are using questionnaire. Please adopt survey. Descriptive survey, explanatory survey is okay. Cross-sectional survey, fine. And then justify why you are using that. Secondary data, those using secondary data, ex post facto design. You are collecting data that is already made available in their annual report, events that have occurred, you are extracting, and you could blend it with content analysis, you could blend it with case study, you could blend it with whichever other research design that you want to use. And all of this, you can understand it, either you get from the internet or whatever it is. Here is to practically guide you so that you are not cumbered with much theoretical talk. So that is the research design. So we move to the population, because please take note of all of this, because by the time we are doing the analysis, the practical, the software guide, how to do regression, how to do correlation, we'll be referring to your research design. We'll be referring to your research design, we'll be referring to your population, how your data have been collected. So please take note of this. So now we move to the population of the study, which is the third. And many students miss it out from population of the study. And when they get to the defense panel, they are asked a question. What is your population? And some will say, all the students in University of Lagos. No, you have not said anything yet. So what is the population of the study, and why do we need to identify the population of the study? Every research is conducted to address a problem, and depending on what you define by a problem. But a problem also cannot just generate on its own. It applies to a group of people or elements. And because that problem, for example, if you are talking about corruption in Nigeria, it applies to individuals. And if you bring it down to student level, you see how you are defining your population. You don't want to talk about the whole Nigeria, you have brought it down to student level. And you don't want to talk about the whole student in Nigeria, you have brought it down to University of Lagos. You don't want to talk about the whole student in University of Lagos, you have brought it down to students in Faculty of Management Sciences. So anything could represent your population, but it must be well defined. It is you that will define your population, the group of people which your study applies to. And so you see the theoretical discussion there. The population of a study is the group on which the result of the research can be applied, or for which the findings can be generalized. If I'm doing a research project on student academic performance, then you see that my findings should be applied only to students, because the study in itself is designed to study student academic performance. If you are doing a study on financial performance of companies, a listed company, so you see that your population is listed company, because when you have come up with your findings, you can only generalize on the listed companies. So that's what we mean. So the group of people, individual elements for which your results can be generalized, it's what we mean by your population. So this Kotari and Gag said it is the total participants under consideration in any field of inquiry. A population, according to Asikia, is made up of all the conceivable elements subject to observation relating to a particular phenomenon of interest to a researcher. So these are the theoretical. You could see now some examples there. This could be specific to a group of individuals, final year accounting students in University of Lagos. That is a population. Taxpayers in Lagos State. That is a population. Or organizations, listed companies in the on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Well, we have senior managers. We have senior managers in the deposit money banks in Nigeria, among all. So that is the population. So the practical guide here is what? In this section, what is required of you? Just state your population. Simple. You don't even need to define population, please. You don't even need, because you are not writing a textbook, you are writing a research project. And your methodology, like I said, I'll keep saying it, state what you have done, explain it, and justify it. These are the 3 guiding principles. So how do I write my population? State it. Which category of people does your study apply to? Is it to students? And which category of students? Is it final year, second year, first year students? And which category, part of the world or geographical location of students? Is it University of Lagos or students in tertiary institutions in Nigeria or Lagos State? So you have to define your population, state it. So in this section, be very specific about the group on which your investigation applies or can be generalized. And there are 2 types of population. The one you can count, finite. Then the one you cannot count, which is uncountable, infinite. But in many undergraduate and master's projects and many of the projects you will do, your population is finite. That is, you can count it. If you say students in the University of Lagos, you can tell us the total number of students in the University of Lagos. If you are using listed companies in Nigeria, you should be able to tell us the actual figure of listed companies. If you are saying SMEs in Lagos State, you should be able to tell us the registered SMEs, the figure of the registered SMEs in Lagos State. So you see that you must be specific about your population. State it in figure. The population of this study is 125 SMEs within registered in Lagos State. That is the first thing to do. State it clearly. If you are using secondary data collected from annual reports, state it clearly that the population of this study is 25 deposit money bank listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. That is the population. You must be specific. Don't say all the banks. No. Don't say all the staff in Zenith Bank. No. Don't say all the students. No. Be specific with the figure. State it in figure. Because you have to scientifically determine the sample size. You can't just do it arbitrarily. You have to do it in a scientific way, and you can never determine the sample size properly in a scientific way without knowing what the population is specifically. And so the practical way of doing this, like I said, once you get to population of your study, straight to the point. The population of this study is 150 students in accounting department at the final year level. Finish. Then explain, give reason why you have chosen final year students. That's justifying it. Why are you using final year students? You have to justify. You don't need too much story. Maybe 1 or 2 sentences is okay. And then the second thing is state the source. How do we know that? How do we verify that your 150 is 150 indeed? So we have to verify it, and that's where stating the source. Okay, so look at the example there. Look at the example there, and when we are done with this, I'll take question quickly. Look at the example there. The population of this study straight away consists of what? 61,823 accounting professionals in the public and private sectors who are certified members of ICANN and ANAN. So you have to be that specific. So define it. This is the example. Now give the reason. Look at the reason. The population, I've highlighted it there. So you could see that reason. The population is limited to members of these professional bodies for the following reasons. First, to ensure manageability of data. So you have defined your population to be able for you to be able to manage your data. Then secondly, ICANN and ANAN are the oldest professional accounting bodies in Nigeria. And you could see that the date of their establishment is there. Third, now you don't need to put 1, 2, 3. One reason is sufficient. One reason, but let it be strong enough, let it be convincing enough. And if you like, you can put 2, 3 reasons, but one reason is okay. The population of this study is limited to accounting final year students. The reason is because they would have offered certain courses that will give them the knowledge to attend to the questionnaire. Maybe 300 level students may not be able to attend to the questionnaire, or the study is even specific to 400 level because these are the group that will soon graduate. So you could see, you give a reason for you choosing that population. And another thing, like I said, you must provide a source. How did you get that figure? So you could see here that the sources, if you go to ICANN, in 2017, the total number of ICANN members were 41,774. And if in 2017, the total ANAN members were 20,049. So please, you have to put your source so that anybody that wants to verify can go and verify. And that's one very major principle in science. Using scientific method in research, that's your methodology. It can be verified. Any methodology that cannot be verified and replicated, then it is manipulation. Okay, this is another example. Look at this example. In this study, the population consists of 493 registered final year accounting students from 3 universities in Nigeria. The figure is made up of 210 students from the University of Lagos, representing federal universities, 220 students from the Lagos State University, representing state universities, and 63 students from Afe Babalola University, Ado-Ekiti, representing private universities. Now, the figures were sourced from the accounting departments of the respective university. Now, why did we limit the population to final year students? And this is the reasons. The population is limited to final year accounting students for the following reasons. One, they are the future professional accountants that will work as preparer of financial statements, internal and external auditors, tax officers, management accountants, internal control officers, and public sector accountants. Then, secondly, these universities are among the foremost in their respective category. For example, the Lagos State University ranks second in Nigeria and 501 to 600 globally, and like that. So what we are saying is that state your population in figure. Why have you decided to limit your study to that population? Justify, that's the justification, and then provide the source of the information. So I move to sample size and sampling technique. This is another area that students used to have problem. Sample size and sampling technique. Now, because your population is too large and you cannot actually collect data from all the number of participants, usually they use sample. It's just like the lab scientists want to check if you have malaria. You see that the lab scientists will not empty your blood, remove all the blood in your body and go and check whether there's malaria there. He will only use syringe and take a little portion of your blood. That's what they call sample. Sample, that's a sample. They just take a little from your this thing to go to the lab, and it is that little they will check to generalize that this person has malaria, that or in the blood of this person there is malaria. But remember, they just took a little. That's what sample size is about. So, and that sample size must be a true reflection of the characteristics of the population. It must be a true reflection of the characteristics of the population. And so that's why you must follow scientific method. You see some students will just say the sample size and just put fictitious figure. They just pick 100. How did you arrive at 100? What led to you determining that the representative of your population is 100? How is 100 adequate? So you apply scientific method, and sample size is completely different from sampling technique. The first thing to do is to determine your sample size. But you see, students will say, I use a random sampling technique to determine the sample size. No! Random sampling technique is the technique to use to select your sample size. Let me explain it clearly so that you understand what I'm saying. Now, our population is 1,000 students. We can't sample 1,000 students. We have to determine the sample size. So eventually, we determine the sample size to be 50 students. Now, sampling technique is, how do we now, from these 1,000 students, how do we now select 50? Who should participate? Who should not participate? And that's why we now use random sampling technique. That's probability sampling technique or non-probability. If you are using non-probability, then you are applying judgmental. So you bring out some criteria and say, okay, all the students that don't have money will be excluded. The student that their money is not up to this amount, so that's judgmental, that's non-probability. But probability is randomly. You just use a method, and there are different ways to determine that. You can use rule of thumb. You can use a systematic way that I will count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll pick the fifth person. So the next group, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I pick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's systematic. You arrange them 1 to 1,000, and you are picking the fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You pick that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You pick that one. These are probability methods. But non-probability is based on the judgment of the researcher. You can bring criteria that, okay, the people that will participate, that is how to select that 50, you can come up with a criteria that will guide you in selecting that 50. So, but that is not what you use to determine sample size. And so in here, you will see one of the methods that most students have used, and I will advise you to use that to determine your sample size, but there are other methods. So what's the practical guide here? This is the practical guide, and you can see me highlighting it. In this section, what are you expected to do? You have to determine your sample size, what will represent your population. So you are not talking story, you are not defining anything. This study, the sample size for this study is 150 students out of the population of 500,000 students. Now, that is what to do. The next thing to do is state how did you determine 150. And you could see the formula there. This formula has been used for several decades, and it is called the Taro-Yamane formula. You can see it highlighted in green. This formula, I would advise all of you using primary data to use Taro-Yamane formula, but you can use others. But Taro-Yamane formula has been standardized over the years. Those using secondary data, I will also advise you to use Taro-Yamane. If you are sampling listed companies in the Nigerian Stock Exchange, use Taro-Yamane sample formula to determine the size. And this is the formula. This is the formula of the Taro-Yamane sample size. N, the big N, the small n is the sample size. The big N is the population. The E is the error limit, and which is usually 5%, 0.05. So it is N over in bracket 1 plus n times e raised to the power. The e is raised to the power 2. And there you will have your sample size. So I would cancel that. At this point, apply statistical method of determining your sample size. Don't use your head. Don't be arbitrary with it to say the sample size. You just choose figure. When you come for defense, we will cancel it. Your panel will cancel it. So you have to be scientific in determining your sample size, and this is the method. So after you have determined your sample size, now I'm here. So how do we now pull the sample size? How do we now draw the sample size from the population? That's where sampling technique comes in. And you see, after determining the sample size, you have to state, explain, and justify the sampling method used to select the sample. That is the elements to represent the population from the population. So look at this example. Let's look at this example. The sample size determined for this study to represent the study population is what? 397 accounting professionals. Can you see? 397. But let me go to the population. Look at the population of that study. Look at the population. How many? I've highlighted it here in red. What's the population? 61,823. 61,823. Now, that's the population. Coming to the sample size, you could see that the sample size is what? 397. How was it determined? Using Yamane's formula. So you cannot just determine sample size from your head. How do you know that 397 accounting professionals will adequately represent 61,000? So that whatever we find with these 397, we can generalize and say all the 61,000 accounting professionals are like this. So that is why you use sampling size determinants. So Yamane formula is used. So this is how you present that section. The sample size determined for this study to represent the population is this. This was determined. So you have to now tell us how you determine it. And this is it. This was determined using Yamane's sample formula. So you could see it there. Now, you now give your reason why you have used that sample formula over the years. So I will advise that all of those people using primary data and even secondary data, you can use Yamane formula, but you can go on the internet to search methods of determining sample formula, and you see other ones there. But Yamane has been something that has been used for several decades. So you see how it is presented. You could see the example there. Over the years, the Taro-Yamane sample formula has been established in empirical research as a substantive and valid method of determining sample size. This formula has also been favored by a number of scholars in different fields of study. So you give your justification why you have used that sample size, that method to determine your sample size. Now, the last thing here is the sampling technique. So now that we have determined the sample size, how do we draw up the sample size from the population? That's where we'll be applying our sampling technique. And you could see here now that furthermore, simple random sampling technique was used to draw the sample from the population. I've explained that you use a simple random sampling technique. That's, you have two ways: probability or non-probability method. Probability or non-probability. So you have, if you are using probability, you are talking about simple random sampling, you are talking about systematic, you are talking about cluster and all of that. So you could use, but basically, generally, it is simple random sampling technique or systematic. So, but for those using secondary data, they usually use purposive. That's non-probability. Purposive, because not all the annual reports will have what you are looking for. And since you just go, if you go and select a company that the company does not have what you are looking for, you see that it will not really actually work properly. So usually they use purposive sampling method. That's non-probability. So whichever one you are using, you have to just justify why you are using that one. And you can see the justification. So simple random sampling is used. Now look at the justification. I'm highlighting it. You can give one reason or two, but let it be strong. You don't need to give 4 reasons. You can give 1 or 2. Now see, the sampling technique is preferred compared to other sampling techniques for the following reasons. First, random sampling technique is considered the best technique of selecting a representative sample of the population. You cannot just say the best. You have to say who said it. And that's why you have to cite. You see, now we have cited there. We have cited. So if you say, I'm using this because it is the best, you are not the one to determine the best. Where are you quoting it from? Where are you referencing it from to be the best? So that's why you see citation. And if you said that and you leave that citation, it is adequate. The second, the technique gives every individual in a defined population equal and independent chance to be selected. So all these are addition. But what we are saying is that determine your sample size, state your sample size, tell us how you determine it, then tell us the sampling technique you have adopted to draw the sample size from the population, and justify why you have chosen that sampling technique. And that is the way to present your sample size and sampling technique. Now, when you have infinite population, remember, you cannot determine the figure. For example, the population of my study applies to all the SMEs in the informal sector. And you know, the informal sector, we can't really get a document that states the total number. So if we say now that is an infinite population, we can't count them all. So you will come up with criteria to determine the sample size. And that you will be discussing. You will not use a statistical method, because since you don't have the figure of the population, so that when you want to state the population, you will state first that the population used in this study is infinite, meaning that it cannot be numbered with accuracy. Therefore, the researcher is unable to get or retrieve the exact figure of this population. So you will justify why you are not able. So why are you not able? For example, maybe there is no document available by any government agency that have been able to capture their category of individuals. Or maybe in some areas cannot be verified because of insecurity. So you could have different reasons why. So that is for the population of the study. So your readers know that you are dealing with an infinite population. But what most researchers do to help them so that they can just be scientific all the way, if they cannot determine the population size, they assume an estimate. So you can assume an estimate that why the total population for this particular group cannot be accurately determined. Estimate, it could be estimated to be this, and you have to give reason why you want us to believe your estimate. And one of the reasons, you can use maybe World Bank indices. World Bank indices, you can use indices from the last previous, whichever available. Maybe in 2020, we don't know the number of people or businesses in Lagos State. But in 1999, there was the number was determined to be 10. And now we are in 2022. So you see that you cannot use 1999 data for 2022. And 2022, you cannot get the population because it's infinite. What you will do is you will now use an indices from World Bank, for example, projection, all these 2%, 3% growth rates. So you now say if we use 2% growth rate for the number of years from the last figure, to say now 1999 they were 10 and there was 2% growth rate, then 2%, that is 10 times 1.0002 plus 10 times, so you will be doing that until you arrive at a figure in 2022. So you will use estimates. So now you are the one, so that other people can cite your work. Since they can't find the population, they could now say the population of this study is 50 as found in Yemi 2022. So that is how you go about the population. You either leave it that it is infinite and the population cannot be determined. Therefore, the population of this study involves all teachers in Lagos State, both private and government. We don't know the numbers. You can't retrieve the number. But if you can, do everything possible. But if you cannot, state it there that it is infinite and justify why. When you now move to the sample size, you have to now theoretically, convincingly, or by logic, tell us that you want to use 100. Why are you using 100? Now, you are not using a statistical method to determine 100. You want to use logic, that is explanation, to convince me that you determining 100 on your own is okay. So you have to discuss why you are using 100. Is 100 adequate? How will the 100 apply to this infinite population? So you have to provide justification, and that will cover for your sample size. So any panel that sees that, they will no longer be asking you, how did you arrive at your sample size? They have seen that your population is infinite, and you have justified why it is infinite. Then your sample size, you have stated a figure, and you have been able to justify why that figure could represent the population. We move to your questionnaire or your parameters for collecting secondary data. So these are the two things. Now, please, I want you to pay attention, because if you don't design your questionnaire properly, it will affect your study. Your findings will not be correct. Your findings will be, in fact, you'll be getting bad results, and the devil will come and tempt you to manipulate your results, as he has done to many researchers. Because once they have collected data and the data does not fit what they have argued, imagine that you have suffered to collect data, you have done analysis, and your study is not significant at all. In fact, the analysis is just giving you some results that nobody can even take. you see that you would have wasted time, effort, and all of that. Now we are at 3.5, data and data collection method or research instrument. Please pay attention. The theoretical explanation here is simple. Data collection instrument is a tool you use to collect or gather, measure, and analyze your data. Basically, researchers can use a range of methods. You could determine to use observation. That is, you just sit in a class. You want to observe how many number of times students will touch their phone in class, in lecture, during lecture. So you see that you have not given anybody questionnaire. You are just looking at all the students while lecture is going on. And you are observing. This one, after 5 minutes, he will just look at his phone. He continue the lecture. After 5 minutes, this will look. So you are studying, you are observing, and you are recording your observation. So nurses use that. They want to observe the number of times they drip or something, heartbeat is observation. So you see doctors who put their stethoscope there and they are recording the number of times the heart is beating, they are recording it. That's data, they are collecting data. It's observation. You understand? You are observing and you are taking record of what you are observing, which you will go and analyze. So you could do observation. Now you could use interviews. This is interview that you just select a few people, you want to interview them regarding their academic performance and quality of lecturers. Whether quality of lecturers affects their academic performance. So you could also use interview and get just a handful of participants and interview them, which will generalize for others. And then you could use, you could examine secondary sources for those that will be using secondary data. But the choice of your research instrument depends largely on your objective and the nature of your research and the type of data you want to collect, whether primary or secondary data. So now I will go to the practical guide and then I will explain certain things further. Look at the practical guide there. It's highlighted green. What you are expected in this section to do: state the type of data you want to collect. For example, under your data and research instruments, you say the data that this study collects or intend to collect are primary data. Please just state it. This study would depend on primary data for its analysis. Oh, this research project would depend on secondary data for its analysis. That is the first thing. You have told us now the nature of data you want to collect. The second is, which instrument do you want to use to collect your data? Which instrument? So for those that are using primary data, that you say this study depends on primary data to justify, to analyze each study. The instrument used or to be used to collect this primary data is the questionnaire. Questionnaire. So that's, you will now state the instrument, questionnaire. You state interview, or by observation, or instrument, experiment. When you state, explain what you mean by questionnaire, and then you will justify why do you think questionnaire is best for your study. And like I said, like I've always been explaining, you don't need plenty reasons. You can tell us that questionnaire is easy to collect large volume of data. You can say questionnaire is cheaper. You can use whichever reasons you give is left to you, but always justify. Now, for those using secondary data, you are extracting your data from a secondary source, which is either annual report or other report. Now, if I'm collecting data of students' CGPA, I will go and extract it from their broadsheet. So you see now that that is a secondary source of my data. So when you are talking about your collecting your data, you say this study depends on secondary data for its analysis. And the data are extracted, collected, gathered from you tell us the source, the annual report or broadsheet or a budget of organization or whichever this thing. So that is the second thing. Tell us the data you want to collect, tell us the instrument you want to use, and then justify. Now, when you are justifying for secondary data, definitely you know that annual report tells more of a company than any other thing. So the broadsheet should give us a more detailed performance indicator of student academic performance. So that's the justification why you are getting it from the broadsheet, why you are getting it from annual report. So please take note of that. State the data, your study depends on primary or secondary data, then state the instrument. But for the purpose of this study, I will explain how you design your questionnaire. I will explain that. It is very, very important because it will help you in whether to use regression, correlation, or chi-square test or whichever test. But before I go that, now you see that in most undergraduate and master's research projects, the questionnaire is widely used method or instrument in social sciences, management science, and behavioral research. You could also use interview schedule or create a parameter scale to extract secondary data from annual reports or other secondary sources. So questionnaire is more well favored. And there are 3 ways to design your questionnaire. Now I will go and pull out one questionnaire to explain the questionnaire design. But before I explain the questionnaire design, this is an example. Can you see that example there of how to present that state? Now, in this study, primary data was collected for analysis in order to achieve the study's objective. That is the first thing to do, how to state it there. The next thing is that a structured questionnaire instrument was designed to elicit information concerning the variables, concerning personal and organizational variables, all these variables. So you see that the next thing is to state the instrument that has been used. Then the third thing is to explain, justify why we have used that instrument. So you see that all of these are justification. The choice of the questionnaire compared to interview and observation is based on the following reasons. First, according to this, questionnaire is more appropriate in the field of social and behavioral sciences, where hypothesis testing is concerned with the relationship between non-manipulated variables. Second, so what I'm saying is that justify why you are using the instrument. And for majority of you, you are either using questionnaire or you are extracting your data from secondary source, that's annual report. So it is very simple. When you are using questionnaire, this study depends on primary data and questionnaire has been used. Give your reasons why you are using questionnaire in relation to your study. Secondary data and data have been extracted from annual report. Give your reasons why you are extracting it from their annual report and not their website, what they put on websites. So that is for this section. Then remember to put the shortcoming of the method. You see now, look at this last portion I'm highlighting. You see, the shortcoming of using questionnaire to collect data is that it limits the number of questions that can be asked. It's not like interview. You know, interview, you can ask the person this question, that question randomly. But questionnaire, you have already detailed what you want to ask. So I want to share a questionnaire now. Can you see? Now look at this questionnaire. The first portion here, the first portion is to design the cover page where you write your letter to your participants. Dear participants, dear students, dear accounting professionals, you tell them your name, you will tell them the purpose of your study, and you tell them how that by them filling this questionnaire, it is their data will be kept in confidence. So that is, you will not display, you will not publish their data, their information, so that they can actually participate. Now, look at this questionnaire. The first aspect of the questionnaire is divided into two, usually three. The cover letter, the section A that covers either biodata of the participant, or if it is to companies, the characteristics of the company. So you could see, now it's not for you to put everything in the biodata, only those ones that are relevant. Because some would design questionnaire and you go and put marital status. How does marital status relate with your study? It does not relate, except if you have a way that knowing their marital status will it's a contribution to your study. But if you don't need that, please don't put it. The basic biodata you want to know: male or female gender, age bracket. If experience matters in your study, you put work experience. Like if you are sampling students, you don't need highest academic qualification. Say now I'm sampling final year accounting student. I don't need to bring in their academic qualification because they have not graduated. And maybe those that have a ND or something, it may be one or two or a few of them. So that is not relevant. So you put information in the biodata that are relevant to the study. If I'm doing study on undergraduate student, why will I put ICANN membership? Except if ICANN membership is a variable I want to consider that makes some students to understand lectures delivered in class better than others. Then maybe ICANN membership may play a role. But if it is not playing a role, don't put it there. So don't load your questionnaire with irrelevant things. Put what you know that it is basic, the basic gender, age, then and those that are relevant to your study. You can use location too, all of that. Work experience, if they are relevant to your study. So that is the first thing. The first, second thing in, if religion is relevant to your study, you put religion. If religion is not relevant, there is no need to you putting religion. So that's the guiding factor. Only relevant items that will add quality to your work, that you will use. Now, we move to the next. The next aspect of the questionnaire is now to measure your specific variables. The variables that you want to analyze using regression, using correlation, using chi-square, using whatever it is. And I said there are 3 ways of doing this. You either create a scale, and I'm starting with this. This 6th item in this questionnaire is to measure one variable, professional body involvement. Involvement of professional body is a variable. Whether the involvement of professional body affects the way the professionals, their ethical disposition. So you will come up with statements that you either get from literature or general basic knowledge. General basic knowledge. And there is a section where we will discuss the reliability and validity of this item. So that, because not all statements you put will help you measure your variable. Some may even scatter the variable. So, but you have to ask similar questions revolving around that variable. So when you pick a variable, ask yourself, what kind of statement, for example, if I want to measure your likeness for rice as a variable. So that is one variable, likeness of rice. I can ask you, I can put a statement before you to test if you like, to check if you like rice. Now, when you are sick, you ask the food you prefer to eat is rice. Strongly agree, disagree, and all of that. I will say, ask again, when you are happy, the food you prefer most is rice. I will ask, when you go out on occasion and they are serving varieties of food, your first preference is rice. You will either agree, disagree. So you see now that I'll put statements like 4, 5. You can put as many as possible. So what I'm saying is that you will put statements together to measure one variable, and don't tie the variable with another variable. Don't tie your independent variable with your dependent variable in your questionnaire. Measure each variable independently. That will help you to be able to use regression, correlation, ANOVA, t-test. But if you put the 2 statements together, tying your dependent and independent variable together, you can no longer use regression. The only tool that will be available for you will be mostly chi-square. Do you understand? So that's why you need to design your questionnaire in a way that will help you measure your variable adequately, properly. So like I said, you come up with statements revolving around that particular variable, and that is how you will do it for all your variable that you want to use to run your analysis. I say the first is to create your construct, which you have as example there. The second thing to do is to, if you don't want to create, is to go and adopt. That is, in another study, somebody has done similar study with what you are doing. Go and adopt what the questionnaire, the construct that person have used already. Instead of you trying to create, just state there that constructs were adopted, and you tell us from which study and which the studies you have adopted your constructs. So you have to tell us that. And that's for section. Now look at this questionnaire. You see that it is 1 to 20. This item statement 1 to 20. This was adopted. This particular construct is to measure individual ethical ideology, and it was not created by the researcher. It was adopted from another study. It was adopted from the original researchers that created it, and it is allowed. In fact, most research, if you want to do a very good research project, the first priority is for you to create, but you don't have time to create. The second priority is for you to adopt. And when you adopt, in fact, your panel won't like it, because it shows that you are connecting with other studies. But if you go and create, they will now be asking you plenty questions that you will not be able to answer. So you can create, but if you know how to create, beautiful, perfect, I will advise you to create. But preferably, because of the time space, adopt. If you can adopt, you can create where there is no one to adopt, and there's no problem. When you create, you use Cronbach Alpha, you use factorial analysis to justify what you have created, that it measures what you want it to measure. So the third is to adapt. So if, for example, this person has created this 20 items, for you to adapt, you can just pick like 5 and add your own. You can pick 5 that are relevant to you and then add your own, maybe to make it 6 or 7. So you have adapted to this original construct to measure your variable. And like I said, please measure each variable independently of the dependent variable of one another. It is in doing that that you can use regression. It is not when you have collected data and you did not separate it, then you want to use regression, then your study is not valid at all. So please take note of that. And that's why by the time you do your questionnaire, you have to check it out with your supervisor. Then the last thing I will talk about questionnaire design before you can ask your question, because this is very, very important. This other skill is adopted. Now, you can also create scenario. You can come up with a story. Then from that story, you now ask question to measure your variables. And usually scenario questionnaires are very, very important. All of you writing on tax compliance, anything that has to do with behavior of people, the best way to measure that is to give them scenario and see how they react in that scenario, which you will use to measure. For example, this is an example of a scenario. Give them a story, and when they from the story, you now ask them question whether they agree with what happened in the story. That will help you to measure the variable. So this now is measuring ethical decision making, one variable. And from that scenario, they ask, the situation above involves an ethical problem. Some respondents may not be able to identify, some may identify. This is to tell the ethical sensitivity of the respondent. The decision maker should report the expense charge to the audit department of the company. This is to check the decision that the respondent will make if he were the one. So all this will measure one variable. You will look for the mean of them to measure a variable. You'll be taught how to compute new variable from your questionnaire item. For those using secondary data that plan to use secondary data, your own is very easy. All you need to do is that you are extracting your data from annual report, maybe profitability of company. Which method measure are you using? Are you using return on asset or return on equity? You will only just extract the item you need and compute the return on equity, which will stand as variable for each company. So that one is straightforward. Just get annual report, or if I'm saying I want to measure CGPA or academic performance of students, I will just go to the broadsheet and collect their CGPA. You see that one does not involve creating a questionnaire or anything. That's for secondary data people. The data is already there. It's just for you to go and extract it. Or those that are writing on corporate governance, board size, you will see it in annual report. Number of directors that are executive and all of that, non-executive director, you will see it in the annual report. All you only need to do, retrieve from the annual report what you want. It is primary data people that are, it is more technical how you go about developing your construct or adopt a construct. So if you see a study that has been done in that applies in marketing and you want to use it in accounting, you can adopt the same questionnaire or adapt to it instead of creating your own. That is what I have said so far about questionnaire. Now, two things that are major and which all of you must do if you are using questionnaire. For those using secondary data, you are not doing anything, but you will have to discuss it. It is called validity and reliability. How do we know that your data is valid? How do we know that we can rely on your data? It is called validity and reliability. For those using secondary data, to ensure the validity and reliability of your data, just make sure you use certified data. For example, collecting data from annual report, that is use the one that has been audited by an accounting firm. If you go and use the one that is just online somewhere and it is not audited by an accounting firm, that data is not valid. That's why you could see companies having different data in their annual report. You know definitely when companies want to evade tax, they can manipulate data, their annual report, and so many reasons. But to ensure the validity of your secondary data, please use the certified copy. For example, if I want to measure student academic performance and I want to use their CGPA, I will not use the broadsheet that has not been signed, because anything can change there. A broadsheet that has not been processed, they can say, okay, go and add marks for students, go and reduce mark and all of that. But I will go and use for the one that has been signed, because that is more authentic. That is what, so in that section, tell us what makes your data valid and why we should rely on the data. So you just give that the data extracted and used for these studies are valid because they were retrieved from the annual audited financial report of companies or from certified copies of students' broadsheets. So please take note of that. It is very, very important. You will be asked in your defense, how did you go about ensuring the validity and reliability of your data? Now, and there are different validity. I will not go into theory to tell you criterion validity, constructs, content, but what you will do, your supervisor certify the face and content validity. So what I'm saying is that when you design your questionnaire, let your supervisor look at it, but before your supervisor looks at it, you can give it to a professional to look at it for you. And professional here could mean anybody that is knowledgeable about that field, because you will state it in your in that section, and then you give your supervisor. So when they are talking about validity of the research instrument, so you will state there that a copy of to ensure the validity of the research instrument, a copy of the questionnaire was given to the project supervisor and was also given to an expert whose comments and constructive criticism improve the quality of the questionnaire to ensure that it measures what it ought to measure. So that is the validity. Now, reliability. All of you using questionnaire, you have to compute Cronbach alpha, which when we are taking the practical section, I will explain to you. Or you have to compute what we call factor analysis. Factor analysis. But basically and generally, Cronbach alpha is used. Then, I would also, if you can, I would advise that you use a test retest Meaning that before you go to the field, you want to distribute 100 questionnaire. First and foremost, do a sample of 10 and get the feedback and see whether it is something will give you what you want to measure. Please, that is very, very important if you are doing using questionnaire. Test, retest. Before you go and distribute your questionnaire, you can use 10 copies and give your course mates. You can use 10 copies and give a group of people depending that relates to your to the area of study of investigation. And that 10 copies, you collect them back and analyze it first to now see whether, as you are going to the field, you will collect the data that you really want to collect. That is under reliability. So these are the two main ways you can ensure the reliability of your research instrument. But I will teach you how to do the Cronbach Alpha, which is the basic one most students use if they don't want to give themselves headache of test retest. But if you do test retest, it will make your work more robust and it will impress the panel that you can easily score an A at the defense. So just imagine that Elon Musk wants to go to space and they have not gone to space before. And is it when they are going to space, they will now know whether the spacecraft can take them to space or not? Is it on their way to space? You see that would be very risky. So what they will do is that they will send a robot and put him inside a spacecraft. Say, you go to space. So the robot will be going to space, and if the spacecraft explodes, then they would have been able to know what made it to explode, because the computer will be sending data back to the ground instrument. So it is when that robot gets to space and come back alive. So that's where they can now say, we want to put human being inside the spacecraft and take the human being to space. That's what test retest simply means. If you take your questionnaire out there and just distribute, and you come back and your result is not, you are not even getting good result at all, you will be tempted. Do you want to go back to the field and start distributing new fresh questionnaire when defense is just some days to go? You see that you will be tempted to want to manipulate your results. You'll be tempted to want to lie and say change figures, because I did fraud. I'm an expert of fraud. So one of the things that make people to put their hand in fraud is pressure. So when the pressure comes on you, you will see yourself, you have to tell lies. You have to manipulate, and you will see your which lies is of the devil. You see yourself partnering with the devil to tell lies, to manipulate. And when you come before the panel and they ask you questions, you will not be able to defend it. So that's why it is better to do the right thing. And that's why we are doing this training, so that you understand what you are doing and do the right thing. And it's not only for now. When you go for job interview, you'll be able to talk with sound knowledge about your research problem, because like I said, it is a high critical thinking and problem solving skills, and even communication skill. You can put that in your CV, that you have a high problem solving skill, high critical thinking skill, and communication. And if they ask you at the interview, explain what do you mean by this? Because for you to identify a problem and you apply scientific method to address that problem in research, collecting data, that's a scientific method of resolving problem. That's problem solving skill. And for you to be able to break the problem to achievable objective and choose which method to use, or what I've been explaining, that's a high critical thinking skill and communication skill. So that's why you have to do the right thing, and it will go a long way. If you adopt a scale, in your work, then already, and that scale has been validated before, then you can write on that your instrument is valid because you adopted them from studies that have already validated them. So for this study, look at the practical there. First, prior study was consulted to identify concepts that help explain the topic and the purpose of the study. Second, validated questions and measurement scales such as this were adopted, and you can see what is written here. Thus, establishing construct validity. Can you see it now? Why? Because they were adopted from prior study. So construct validity is settled. The one you give your supervisor is called the phase and content validity. Can you see? The phase and content validities were certified by a panel of experts in research methodology, accounting, and business ethics, whose critiques of the draft questionnaire aided the final version of instrument. This is then, look at the last aspect. Finally, a pilot study was conducted to pre-test. Let me highlight everything so that you see it well there. So this is what we mean by finally a pilot study was conducted to pre-test the instrument. According to this researcher, pre-testing survey instrument is one of the methods commonly used to help increase reliability and validity of measurements, of measures. Look at what it does. It ensures that problems associated with the question ambiguity, length, and sequence are identified early and eliminated. So take note of that. And this is how the pilot study what was done. I've highlighted it again. Accordingly, the pilot study was conducted on 20 chartered accountants. And look at the breakdown. And this is what we need from the pilot study at your level. The feedbacks and suggestions gotten from the pilot study were used to revise the questionnaire. So if you state this, then you are covered. So you will state it clearly what you have done to ensure the validity of your research instrument. For reliability, you could see that we use a Cronbach alpha. Can you see our highlighting this now? Look at it. For this study, Cronbach alpha was computed based on the number of items on the survey and the ratio of the average inter-item covariance to the average item variance to establish a degree of reliability of the instrument. Don't worry about this grammar. I will show you practically what we mean, how to compute reliability, to do your reliability test. So these are very important if we must believe that your data are authentic. And look at the result of the reliability test. What this simply means is that in the questionnaire, 10 statements were used to measure one variable. And this is the Cronbach alpha result. The minimum is 50, but this is 73, which is a good, so we will retain that it is reliable. So you could see all the different items there. For this particular variable, personal egoism, you see that 4 statements is used to measure that variable. And the reliability test came out as 71%. 71%. You see that it is reliable. So that is how the Cronbach alpha. I'll show you how to compute the Cronbach alpha. So please, you have to install SPSS, and then how to interpret it is there. It's very simple. The interpretation is that anyone that is above 50 shows that it is reliable. But below 50 shows that measurement is not reliable. So we use factorial analysis to reduce the scale. I will also show you when we do that of the data analysis. Okay, so that is for reliability and validity of research instrument. We are still on research instrument. So let me quickly explain administration. There are different ways you could administer your questionnaire. But what at this point, the practical guide here is that tell us the one you are using and justify it. If you are using online, why are you using online? You cannot just say I'm using online. If not, it will assume that you just sent the instrument randomly and manipulated your data. Why are you using online? Why are you using online survey? Why are you using personal contact? Why are you using? So you have to justify the way you have distributed your questionnaire. Those using secondary data, you don't have problem with this one because you are taking data that have already been collected for you and kept down. So that's why you don't need all this stress. But those using primary data, you have to do all those things. So how did you distribute your questionnaire? And usually, this is where we get students. You see some students say, oh, I gave bank managers, we ask. So how did you give it to them? Some say, I went there, say, and you met bank manager and they collected questionnaire from you. You see that those students will be lying. Except if they are truthful and they will state one thing that they will meet on the way is that not every bank manager will collect questionnaire from you. They are too busy to fill questionnaire. So that's the problem with research in Nigeria. Data. You give somebody questionnaire, say, sorry, I'm busy. And you are writing about them to help their organization to address problem, but they are too busy to give you information. Some will even tell you that in this organization, we don't give out information. So you see that it is a problem. That's why at times, many students go and use secondary data because it is easy. They'll just sit down, download annual reports in their hostel, extract their data and do their analysis. But primary data, you are struggling. Who do I give to fill my questionnaire? And like I said, it will be wrong for you to fill it yourself. That's you are already introducing a faulty foundation in your scholarly pursuit in life. You're being a professional because you are already compromising integrity. Okay, so there are different ways. You can use personal contact, you can use online, but whatever it is you are adopting to be the method of distributing your questionnaire, please justify why you are using that method. Very important. So I move to this is another area, operationalization and measurement of variables. Operationalization and measurement of variables. Please, the first thing to do here, identify clearly your variables. There are some students that are using control variables. These are not your dependent variable, they are not your independent variable, they are control variables. Don't lump them up together. And what does operationalization of your variable mean? Please simply identify your variable. Which one is dependent variable? Which one is independent variable? You will identify. The dependent variable in this study is this, and this. For example, look at what is there. Can you see? The variables of this study include ethical decision-making stages, which are the dependent variables. The independent variable, you see now, the independent variables are this personal, you see it, personal, organizational, and situational variables. So operationalize your variable. That's the first thing. Simply, when you get to operationalization and measurement of variable, the first thing is tell us which one is your dependent variable and which one is your independent variable. Let it be clear to your readers. The second thing now is tell us how you have measured this variable. Tell us. So for those using primary data, I have already explained questionnaire. You will tell us To measure this variable, that variable, you constructed a construct and scale were developed. Remember, I told you you can develop a scale, a construct, putting 5 statements, all of that. So to measure, for example, students' eating habits, a construct was developed and which the respondent responded to measure that. A construct relating to eating habits was developed. For those using secondary data to measure performance of companies, that is where you say you use the return on assets or return on equity or market price per share. You have to state how you measure this variable, and it is very good if you put it in table. You put the variable, you tell us how you are measuring it. What are you using to stand for the variable? Performance, I'm using return on equity, not return on assets. And then you tell us the source, or why are you measuring it like that? So do you get the 3 again? Tell us, operationalize the variable. Tell us which one is your dependent, which one is your independent variable. Secondly, you tell us the measurement. This variable, this is how I have measured this variable. This is what I have used to measure this variable. If I want to measure your academic performance, I will say I measured academic performance using student CGPA. That is what I mean by measurement of variable. And why did I use CGPA? CGPA is a true picture and reflection of the way students are performed over a period of time. So you see that you have operationalized the variable, you have stated what you use to measure it, and then you are telling us why you have measured it the way you have measured it. But if you don't have a way to justify, look for a study that measures it the way you are measuring it and say this variable was measured using the way Sonny 2019 measured the variable. You are covered. So that is operationalization and measurement of variable. So you could see how these variables, the practical guide here. So I've read it. The variables of this study include ethical decision-making stages, which are the dependent variable. The independent variable are personal, organizational, and situational variables. You see them in brackets there. Now, these variables ensued from theoretical framework or from the theoretical framework of the study and from the review of prior business ethics literature. Now, furthermore, the measurement of these variables were guided by the theories and models used in the study. You see, they were adopted. Let me go to, now look at this. I've highlighted something. Furthermore, to measure other variables, first, the questionnaire was designed to collect general information on the personal characteristics of the respondents, which include gender, age, this and all of that. The questionnaire, look at, secondly, was also designed to collect information of the organizational characteristics where the respondents work, which include the size of the organization, sector, presence of a formal code of ethics, and commitment to staff welfare. So you have to state what and what did you use, how did you measure your variables. So the last 2 sections, we have the model specification. We have model specification. This section is very straightforward. All you are specifying is that you are trying to establish a relationship that your dependent variable and independent variable are linked together. Now look at the model specification. All you only need to do here is we call it specification. You are only specifying your model, which is showing the mathematical link, the way the variables are linked together, what you want to test. So you could see here that this EDM is the dependent variable, is a function of this. This is a regression model, that is ethical decision making for I, that's I now, is for company 1. And is a function of constant. This is constant. Constant is, you see it there, the one highlighted. Then this is variable 1 for this particular model. You see highlighted yellow. And this is variable 2. So in your project, you are expected to specify the model that you are testing. And all that this simply means is tell or show us where your dependent variable is and how it depends on the independent variable. So this is a regression model. EDM is a function of the first item, beta 1, 0, is a constant, plus the second main variable, mi, and the second main variable, mr. Your own can be long as the model 2, and depending on the number of variables that you are doing. So you can easily, freely, even just say EDM is equal to mi plus mr, meaning that you are saying these two variables affect the dependent variable. So the one on the right is the independent variable, the one on the left is the dependent variable. They equal to separate them. So it's just to state the model, and that's all. You move forward. So always identify you don't need to write plenty models like this. No, you don't need to. Each one is enough. Actually, this last model would have been enough. So therefore, you state what each of these letters they means. So where EDM are the stages of rest model, you can see it, which constitute a dependent variable, and the independent variable mi, moral idealism. So when you are writing your model, use abbreviation. Then it is here you expand and tell us what you mean by the abbreviation. COEC, organizational egoism climate. So that is what we mean by that. I've explained operationalization and measurement of variable. So the last, which is data, a method of data analysis. This is where when we come back, we will now be looking at the different ways you can analyze your data. But at this point in your research report, all you only need to do is to state the method you are using to analyze your data, explain them, and tell us why you are using the method. Descriptive and inferential statistics analysis were performed on the data collected. Descriptive statistic analysis was performed to present a summary of the respondents' demographic. The ethical issues were assessed using mean and standard deviation estimates to describe the data. And all of that, you tell us why. And then furthermore, you could see furthermore there to test hypothesis. You could see highlighted there. Furthermore, inferential statistics were performed on the data following the outcome of the diagnostics tests. I will explain that when we are doing the practicality. So see, Pearson correlation analysis was performed to establish relationship between the explanatory variable and this. While multiple regression was performed to estimate the model 1, 2, 3, and 4. That is this model that we specify here, these models. These are the models. So all you need to do at that stage, I said, state the analysis that you are using. Explain it and tell us why you are using those analyses, why those analyses fit your study. When you are using analysis parametric tool, you must state why you are using parametric, you must state why you are using non-parametric tool. Very, very important for you to state. And so now the next section, which will take the practical aspect, where we will now learn SPSS, eView, how to impute your data, how to collect your data from your questionnaire and put on a system, how to run all those analyses that are important to you to run, and all of that. So the other two aspects, decision criteria, they are optional. Decision criteria, this you only state at what point do we accept an hypothesis, at what point do we reject an hypothesis. That is what we mean by decision criteria. So if generally it is when the p-value is less than 0.5 level of significance, you will reject the null hypothesis and accept alternative hypothesis. But if it is higher, then you will see how we generate that when we are doing the practical aspect of the SPSS. But you can state this in your chapter 3. Decision criteria. What criteria are you using to accept or reject an hypothesis? And finally, we have the limitations of the methodology. So you state the limitation of the methodology, which you tell us why have you not done other analysis. Why? Because maybe your data is not enough or something. You just tell us what limits your methodology. Why didn't you use some other methods? Because of this limitation, that limited availability of data, and maybe the scope of your work does not cover other aspects or does not require the use of other analysis. So you will see how we'll do all of that when we come back on the practical aspect now to run our analysis.